This is Flowers on the Stage.
Well, it's a really interesting time for us right now for Dizgo and for Jake because I quit my day job. I had a full-time day job that I was balancing music with for years. And, it's always was a goal to get it to the point where that would be financially sustainable to just kind of play gigs and pay the bills that way. And once you get to that tipping point and you don't know what the other side looks like, it's really hard to, I mean, it's hard for me. I can't speak for everybody, but to take that leap of faith and feel comfortable that you're gonna be able to make ends meet and provide for yourself and your family, whoever Pickle has a kid. I don't have a kid, but just pay the bills just through music. And so we got to the point where we were at that tipping point and we just made that push. I cut the ties, quit my day job that was paying me pretty good. And now we have all the time that we can set aside for music to grow musically, to grow our relationships with each other, to flex the muscles of writing music and just improving. It takes time. Like you have to develop those muscles with each other. You have to pour through it. And a lot of bands do that by just touring for 10 years and playing a lot together, but we're kind of trying to put in the work on the front end and practice all of our improvising and writing together just in our rehearsal space and then go out and tour with it. So we're having a lot more time right now than I ever have had in my life to just play music. And that feels incredible. Like when I was working and we're setting aside time to practice, it was almost like, okay, here's the practice. We got to cram for the next three shows this weekend. And then we go back to our jobs and then okay, we have 2 days we can rehearse this week. Let's freaking cram everything we can for three sets. And you never get that kind of like you get to breathe and just play your instrument creatively, come up with new parts because there's no pressure to like it's like play, we're hanging out, we're having fun, we're experimenting musically, and that gets reflected in the shows because we're more comfortable. We're not coming up to this point that we have been cramming to get to. We're just relaxed and it makes things flow better musically, and that's really what it's all about, man. And you have to get past that tipping point of like, am I able to do this or do I have to take a leap of faith? And there's really no answer for that. You have to just do it and see what happens. And you might fail. And that goes with anything in life, If it's worth doing, it's worth taking a chance on.
That's why it's called a leap of faith, though, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's not a leap of everything's gonna be great. Don't worry. Like you don't know. And that's part of it. And that's okay.
Yeah, and I don't know how like worthwhile it would be, right? If it didn't take that.
Right.
So what would you say improvement looks like for you personally at this point and like where you're at with music?
It's a good question. I think everybody, musically or through anything, improvement is never a linear path. And it's certainly not an exponential path. It is like stair steps or even like a triangle wave, where you're gonna see improvement, you're gonna plateau for a while. You're even gonna feel like sometimes that, man, I feel like I was better at the keys last year or something, because you go through ebbs and flows of where you're at mentally or where you're at with your instrument, or you try new sounds and you get kind of bogged down. It's never a steady path, but if you keep at it and you work through the plateaus and the dips even, you'll turn around and look at where you were 2 years ago or whatever and be very happy with the improvement you've seen in yourself. And that's why it's important to kind of have like have a bird's eye view and just kind of focus on improving, focus on just being creative and flexing those muscles, like I said, is a different muscle to practice being creative, practice writing music instead of, playing your scales or whatever. Improvement looks different for everybody, what it means to or how long it takes, and so it's always a personal journey. And even if you don't see it for a while, if you keep at it, you'll look back and be happy with your improvement.
That's interesting. You mentioned like creativity itself being how do you kind of work on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things. It's kind of a catch-22 that you can't force yourself to be creative. That's goes against the entire purpose of art or of what being creative is. But you can practice how you get yourself ready to be creative, how you set maybe a mood for yourself to be creative in. You can practice, shifting your focus to being creative. You can practice just the kind of methodical steps you take in your creativity. There are things within creativity itself that can be honed and practiced. You can't force yourself to, okay, I'm going to write a song right now and it's going to be great. But the more you just tell yourself, I'm going to write a song right now, it doesn't matter if it's great, then you're kind of refining the process that it takes you to get to something creative. And then that will hopefully come along easier the next time.
I'm curious what you would say has been the most challenging thing for you with like learning and growing as a musician. Like what specific aspect musically has been like a real challenge?
That's actually the what was just on my mind talking about creativity. Like I think I'm a super creative person because that's probably one of my struggles is I don't feel like I'm a super creative person. I feel like I'm a very left brain. I have like I'm electrical engineer at heart, I'm a processes um, pattern kind of recognition brain. And you can flip stuff like that into creativity. And by the process that I was just talking about of maybe analyzing what it takes me to get to a creative um, product or a creative process, and then kind of refining those practices. But I have to force myself, and this is what we were just talking about, to just snap, be creative. That's hard for me. I feel like I can analyze patterns musically and through music theory, like insert a chord progression that I feel like makes sense of this part of the jam, but maybe there's a disconnect between the divine inspiration of creativity and maybe it's coming from more of a like analytical logical place in my brain of why I chose to create it, but that's still creating. So I struggle sometimes with just making that happen, getting that like divine moment of just spark of magic, because you can't force that.
Catch Dizgo on tour this fall. Find tickets to a show near you at dizgo.com/tour.
Do you remember what it was like writing the first song you wrote?
Yeah, it's very satisfying. I mean,
Take me through like that time, like you actually writing that first song, what it was like.
I think I wrote a song for a girl in middle school, a girl that I probably wanted to,
Lucky lady.
yeah, probably wanted to give her my hoodie really bad or give her a hug off when we get off the bus, and I was probably too terrified to do it. And I probably was too terrified, God forbid, to actually write a song and then ever show it to anybody. So I'm sure it never happened, but it lived in my head in a perfect little middle school moment of just singing a song to a girl and getting a hug or whatever. Yeah, I'm sure I never showed it to anybody, but I remember being satisfied by just the process or just the improvement that I had gone. I probably wrote it on an acoustic guitar, right? And just being able to put three chords together and sing a melody. I mean, that's a song. And it's, yes, you gotta start somewhere.
I'd love to hear something you think is either like misunderstood or often overlooked by, and you can answer this question however you want, like up and coming musicians or up and coming actual bands, something you think's kind of like overlooked.
Yeah, there's a couple things. Something I'm learning a lot about, I'm actively trying to learn about and improve is, yeah, how we treat a band. Like there's a certain point where it has to operate like a business. And it can be frustrating because you're taking a thing that is your creative little baby and now you have to market it and advertise it, and you have to do social media. God, we'll get into the social media as a specific thing that is definitely overlooked, but that's still part of your brand that you have to build for a business, which kind of is the antithesis of any creative project, trying to just looking at it as numbers and just, inflating something to get revenue or to sell tickets or whatever was not the point of making music in the first place. But if you have a project that you're making music and it's creatively satisfying you in those ways, if you want it to be sustainable, you have to kind of see that other side. And it's frustrating, and it's a totally different skill set. So that has been a nice challenge that as we've been growing, we've all been learning more about how to, operate a band like a business. And another thing I would say more specifically to jam bands, uh, something that is probably overlooked. If you play gigs every so often and you play the same songs, like it's not a big deal at first, but in jam bands today, like we're expected to play like completely different song every night, or a completely different set, sorry, a bunch of different songs, put them all up on the internet, put them on Nugs and Bandcamp, and have people that aren't out at the show like listening. That's great for us to grow online, like people to see our live sets. But there's another thing limiting your like set list choice aside from just the people who are at the show. We can play a show in Philadelphia, and then we could play a couple nights later on the West Coast, and it could be the exact same show, but nobody at the shows themselves is going to know that, right? But as we're trying to grow online and Nugs and Bandcamp and stuff, we have to play like different set lists. We have to have a big long catalog of music, and the bands that we're modeling that after, the Grateful Deads and the Fish and the Umphreys, that have been playing together for 20 years, or Fish obviously more, they have a huge catalog because they've been playing that long. And so we're trying to emulate that as a relatively newer band. And it's a challenge to keep shows fresh when you play, 100 shows a year. It's a challenge. It's a good challenge, but it's an interesting challenge as opposed to just, writing your set and playing it. Kind of trying to balance.
And you can't rely on your best stuff. You gotta kind of keep it moving.
Yeah, you got to keep it moving.
I'd love to hear what you've learned are the most important things when it comes to being a great collaborator and a great bandmate overall.
Yeah, I feel like that's really important for what we're doing. I mean, ultimately, nothing exists musically if four people in a room or on a stage aren't listening to each other and playing together. We could all be independently the best musician you've ever heard at the drums and the best guitarist you've ever heard and the best bassist. And if they're not good team members, or if we don't, maybe you are a good team member with others, but this group, we have to work together. And it's a different skill too, as just playing your instrument, to play with other people and to listen and to adjust what you're playing as it's flowing in real time. That's what separates like a lot of good jam music from like other music is we're up on the stage going into a section that maybe is completely unplanned. And so you have to really have big ears to feel out where other people are going and back them up on a good idea. We got all these muscles. It's not just being good at your instrument. It's not just writing great songs, and it's not just playing well with other people or even being good with business and social media and stuff. You have to kind of work all this stuff interdependently. And yeah, it's challenging.
How much of your jams are, would you say, is something that maybe you've practiced and applied or you've learned versus something that you're just kind of intuiting?
Like in like an improvised musical moment, like on stage.
Yeah.
I would say there is a healthy balance of needing to like, you need to have like a roadmap. Um, this is probably, I wish I was told like this kind of advice when I was getting bands started, and especially jam bands, like having just talking through stuff before and running stuff and practicing and being creative and taking chances is very important for you to build a roadmap to then when you bring it live and you have the moments where you're like, okay, this is the moment in the song after this second verse where we're going to open it up to an improvised idea, but we have kind of a roadmap. Okay, you're going to start, we're going to wash out and kind of start low, and you'll bring this thing in on the keys, and then we'll kind of see where that goes, and then we'll ultimately build it up to this chord progression, and then we'll go back to the chorus, for example. It's important to kind of like have a loose plan and then have just like a couple of like rhythms that you're going to lock into, so that like right when you push into this next section, the bass player and the drummer are locked in on just this one simple thing. They're just going boom, 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 boom. Like, okay, cool. That's what we're doing here. That gives you one thing to just push right into. So there's no like, um, you kind of stick the landing. You know what I mean? Uh, and then from there, that you let that kind of establish itself, and now we're introducing more ideas, and then those ideas will take you ultimately to a fully improvised place, ideally. And then you have your roadmap of how you get out of it. But if you just throw yourself to the wolves, like I've done a million times as I was getting started, it can be bad. And some people, that's what they love most about jam bands, is that you don't know what you're gonna get. And some bands, like I think like Spafford, they completely improvise like a lot of their set, and I think that is awesome. But I don't know if I'd feel comfortable doing that unless I played with these guys 200 nights a year and just had the skills to just make it happen, which they do and a lot of people do. But as a young musician, I would have appreciated kind of like laying out a roadmap like that, and understanding the importance of that. Listen to the tapes, watch the tapes, as they say in sports, um, see what you did wrong and what you did right. And even if you only did something right for a second and then you fell on your face for a while, lock back into what you were doing good for a second, and talk about it with the group, and plan it better for next time.
This is Flowers on the Stage, a podcast about being creative and finding success. To support it, please check out our sponsors, New Belgium Brewing and Thrax CBD. And now, back to the episode.
Jumping to the side a little bit, aside from Dizgo, just talking about you, I'd love to hear like how you define success for yourself.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's never the same metric, is it? The goalposts are always moving. There's like kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs thing that I would kind of visualize if I said that. You've got to fulfill your base needs, physical needs, and paying your bills and making sure you eat dinner and get enough sleep. That's one thing, and that's sometimes hard to do on the road. Um, but you know, success ultimately is going to be different for everybody. And I guess you ask me personally, for me personally, in actual metrics, I want to just, I'm not somebody that needs to like make a ton of money in my life. I just want to pay my bills and then have enough to go out to nice places to eat when I'm on the road. And as long as I'm doing that and making music and having fulfilling relationships with the people that I love, like my friends and my bandmates and my girlfriend, my dog, I feel like the most successful guy in the world. But I think everybody needs to have just some kind of outlet to fulfill their creative spirit to be truly like, personally satisfied. And for me, I've been able to do that lately, and I'm sure times are going to come where I can't say the same thing, and that doesn't make me any less successful. There's ebbs and flows, and it's all right.
What would you say it is about music that makes it like a spiritual thing for you?
That's a good question. Music has always been a spiritual thing for me, man, and I don't know how to answer that question really, but there's just something about the experiences you can tap into, the emotions that you can feel just through a pair of headphones, and a certain song or a certain melody or a certain chord progression that just can take you to another place. It sounds cliched, but that kind of like feeling that's brought on by music, I don't know what else I could describe it to other than any art for that matter. Some people get it more through visual art. Um, I've just always listened to music and been transported to a place that I wanted to understand how people can do that. I don't want to force people to have my experiences when they listen to my music. I want to create just anything, any piece of art that transports someone to their own like spiritual moment, or it doesn't even have to be spiritual. Like that's like what making music is all about is transmuting emotions and experiences and feelings and thoughts without words. And that in itself is spiritual, a spirit of something. It's something that exists, between worlds without words or just by feelings. Like that to me is kind of what a spirit of something is.
It's fascinating that like things you're mentioning, like music, but then also like ideas, and then you like the concept of a spirit. All those things are invisible.
Mhm.
That's super interesting how like spiritual energy and musical energy could both be like you can't see either of them really.
Yeah. And that's how you can communicate with the spirit, with your own spirit, with someone else's spirit, or you can create a spiritual idea in the ethers through just recording it and putting it out into the world, and you can transmute experiences and emotions for other people that add to their creative self or their spiritual self, and these things kind of grow together. It's really really interesting and fulfilling.
It's like an invisible environment for our invisible environment.
Yeah. And they're like overlapping with ourselves and with other people's little invisible worlds. And now we're having little overlaps in our 3D spheres of energy where we're sharing things. And then that's breaking off into my interpretation of your music or your interpretation of my painting, but we shared something with it and then it inspired others. It's interesting.
And so fun.
Yeah. It's cool to kind of visualize it like that. I never thought about that. Where you kind of build through creativity, you kind of build a little ball, a little invisible ball, and you just want to pass it off to somebody and they kind of soak it in and then trade it off and pass it to someone else, and little things like kind of linger or overlap or are shared and then branch off into the next little creative ball that's created.
That's almost like what emotions are, kind of.
Yeah, that's true. You're gonna build up this big ball of anger and throw it at my neighbor for parking in the gravel.
Jumping to the side a little bit, I'd love to hear how you manage kind of like self-doubt and like your overall mindset when things feel rocky, or the future feels rocky.
Yeah, the imposter syndrome, I'd say, is a big thing that I battle. I think it's a big thing that everybody battles. I've talked to musicians that I've looked up to for literally for like 15 years, and they have it. You know, they have the imposter syndrome. And in my mind, I'm like, you have imposter syndrome, but you are the person that I've looked up to forever. You're amazing, and I love everything about you. And that's like, that's not their reality. You know, they have all kinds of self-doubts, and they can play the what they feel like is like the worst set of their life. Like, oh man, I just had like some really crappy moments up there. And then they can walk off stage and somebody can be like, that set just changed my life. That was the most amazing thing I've just heard. So it's really interesting the way that, you know, self-doubt, as you said, is not objective, you know? It is you know, a thing that we're looking at ourselves through a microscope. We're doing that thing where we're laying in bed and you just imagine the cringiest thing you did, like in 10th grade at a social studies class, and nobody cares, you know, it doesn't matter, you know, as long as you're like you're honest with yourself and confident in yourself, and you I think that comes from just loving yourself, which is very important. um then you're going to have those like self-doubts and bad days and frustrations and stuff, but if you ultimately see yourself as a good person and you love yourself, you know, you don't get hung up on the little doubts. Like those are the things that will just kind of build up on you if you don't just shake them off. And it's important to just see the light at the end of the tunnel. You know, you have your imposter syndrome, but what's that matter? I have imposter syndrome all the time, and I'm still gonna keep writing music and playing it. And as long as I focus on that and not, oh God, we played with this band 6 months ago, and I feel like that guy thinks I'm he's better than I am, and you know now I see him again, and these guys don't think I'm good, you know, or whatever. Like it's just it's insignificant. Just keep kind of pushing through and being confident in yourself, and then that shines through, and then you have less moments of doubt.
I'd love to hear something about life that you believe now that when you were younger you didn't believe looking back.
Well, let's just go there then, because I was born and raised in the South, in Tennessee and Georgia, right on the line. So I claim both whenever it's convenient for me. But growing up down there, you know, it's very like um, evangelical Christian upbringing, even in public schools, and from parents who, when I look back on it, are probably not particularly religious, but it's just kind of a thing that ingrains everything around you. If you grow up in the South, you go to church, and I mean, I don't know if that's true for everybody, but it definitely was for me. And I pretty early on, probably like 12 to 13, 14, was like, this isn't gonna be my thing. You know, like I don't know about this. I told my mom and dad, That worked out fine for as long as it did. But the interesting thing that I was going to touch on is that as I've gotten older and I've had more like, we'll talk about spiritual experiences, and stuff like that. And whether it's like through psychedelics or through music or just through just the way you like observe the world and like see kind of synchronicities and stuff through some spiritual experiences, I'd probably say I'm like a little bit more um of a believer in like just some divine universal like cosmic goo out there than I did when I was 14. So hopefully I look at the world differently than when I was 14. But that's something that would have surprised me if you would have told me then at the time that I would believe in a little bit more of a just a universal plan, or maybe we'll say it's even some kind of like predeterminism in a way. I don't know if I believe that, but I believe things are a lot more complex than a kind of a nihilistic view I had for a decade or so of just, we're sitting on a spinning rock and it doesn't matter and God's not real. So I think that kind of changes as you get older, and maybe it'll go back and forth and settle somewhere, but we'll see.
If you had a child and you were able to write a piece of advice that would be in their pocket for the rest of their life, what do you think you might say?
I would say something that I think has benefited me perpetually and still, to every day and for the future, I try to just kind of live like a studious type life where you never are expecting to know everything about anything, and you're just always kind of learning, because the world is so full of people who have so much more experiences, so much more experience than you, and so many experiences and so many insights, and there's so much going on. Like if you ever act like you've got anything small, you've got it all figured out, you're shutting yourself off to new experiences and new perspectives and stuff. So just kind of trying to live like a studious spirit and a studious mentality. You're kind of paying attention to little things and little patterns and listening to people's story and learning from their experiences and their perspectives, and not just thinking you've got something all figured out, because we're all just little kids trapped in big kids' bodies, and nobody's got it all figured out, and anybody who acts like they do is fucking lying. We all know this, but it helps to kind of focus that through a mindset of just, I'm going to keep learning everything I can every day, and I'll try to be a better person through it, and I'll try to give other people around me a better experience, and hope that we all just, you know, get it done and get through this crazy thing.
I'd love to hear what you would say are the most defining personality characteristics of the other guys in the band and like how you describe them.
Okay, it's interesting. I'd say there is a lot of, in our group, for better or for worse, I think there's a lot of stubbornness, and I'm definitely guilty of that, because we're all very, um, we're hard-headed and have strong opinions. But I'd say the diplomacy that we can exhibit as we like, democratically kind of cut through all of our hard-headedness independently and kind of talk things through and get to a democratic decision, I think is a really good like skill that we all have. And it's very important. I mean, you can't have a band where one person makes all the decisions. There's been a million bands that have exhibited that dynamic, and they've all failed eventually. Um, you have to listen to other people, but not only listening to other people, there you have to create an environment where people can speak up their opinions, even if it's different than everyone else's, and feel comfortable that it's gonna at least be acknowledged, and we can democratically, nobody might not like the idea that somebody has for a name of a song, for instance. But if you don't feel comfortable enough to just say it, then your creative spirit is being stifled, and you can't exist in a creative project where your creative spirit is being stifled. So I'm getting off topic a little bit because I'm talking about at large things and not specifically like our group dynamic, but I think it is important to appreciate those dynamics that I've tried to practice and that we've all gotten better at.
For
Just
sure.
yeah. It's good to be really strongly opinionated. I think so, to a certain degree. But then you have to have the self-awareness to listen to other people's ideas, even if they tell you that your strong opinion is not the right move. You have to have those strong opinions and voice them, but then listen to, the democratic like consensus basically. And that's how all our best ideas come out, is bunch of ideas that everybody's very passionate about, but it's because we're comfortable enough to just let them flow and not feel like it's not going to be given a little bit of attention to, by the group democratically. So it's very important to have that kind of dynamic if you want to foster everyone's interdependence of creativity.
1,000%.
Yeah.
Yeah, you gotta make sure everyone's having their voices heard,
Yeah, it might
or
be
else it's just
easier.
kind of like a mission.
Yeah, it might be a lot easier on one hand to let somebody else make all the decisions. That's great, but you're gonna be feeling like you're missing something.
Well, hey man, any final words for the Dizgo fam out there listening?
Yeah, definitely, because we are gearing up for like a couple of the biggest tours we've ever done, and we will have three of the biggest tours we've ever done this year as they follow each other up to be the next biggest, right? So I think we did in July or in August, we did our biggest tour to date, which we went down south. We went to Texas and Oklahoma and played like 5 shows in a row. And that's not that crazy compared to some bands, but for us going that takes maybe 7 or 8 days on the road total. And that was the biggest consecutive run we've done. And then now that's about to be completely dwarfed by this West Coast run we're doing. Not really West Coast, but we're up in the Pacific Northwest, and then we're coming back down through Boise, Salt Lake City to get to Denver, ultimately at Meow Wolf on September 27th. And then later, we're going to have another biggest tour that we've ever done in November in Florida. So there's a lot of really, really big things happening for us, and we're very excited. And we couldn't do that without all the Dizgo fam out there and people listening to the podcasts, and following on Bandcamp and Nugs is huge for us. It really helps us a lot. And we're about to make a change to our kind of online merch system that should make it easier for people to get all the cool heady Dizgo stuff that they want. And my point is that
Let's
there's
go.
yeah, a lot of things happening this year for us, and we couldn't do it without people buying tickets to shows and buying merch and just giving us words of support, commenting on the YouTube videos, and it all means the world. Instagram, following me on TikTok is huge. No, I'm just kidding. I don't have a TikTok.
Jake, dude, huge fan. Thank you so much for what you bring to the scene, and
Much love, dude.